search for meaning, for purpose, for truth, and to try to find one's way in this maze of conflicting ideas and syncretistic belief systems. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit, and I've discussed this in, I think, my previous time here a few years ago, some of the things that take place in terms of transformational culture or evolutionary culture. In many respects, this is going to be an update and to kind of give you a heads up in terms of how this is all still shaping itself out. So the question as we consider our times and the age that we're in is, what now shall we be? What is our role? What is our task? Who are we? And what shall we be? 2 Corinthians 5, Paul tells us this. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you, on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. When you look at the writings of Paul, you see analogies and metaphors being used. He talks about running a race, being an athlete. I'm not exactly the fastest runner. I could run pretty quick if I was scared, but if my brother was mad, he'd usually catch up to me. We get the idea, we get the metaphor of running the race. When he talks about being a farm laborer, we can understand that, or being a soldier, we understand those metaphors. And we look at this, and we're like, oh, well, this is a nice metaphor. No, it's not. He's not saying this is an analogy. He's telling you what you are. Every person in this room who claims to be a follower of Jesus Christ is an ambassador. It's not a question of you becoming an ambassador. No, you are. The question is, are you effective as an ambassador? That's the question. But you are an ambassador, someone who is calling upon the world to be reconciled with God. That is what you are. But what does it mean to be an ambassador? How does this shape up? I've spent a fair amount of time in the past with the diplomatic community, just because of the work I have done in terms of trying to understand global governance and UN agendas. And along the way, I've had the opportunity to hear ambassadors give talks about what they do and what they're all engaged in. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity at a Chicago Council on Foreign Relations meeting to hear the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. And as he was breaking down his role and his position in this new calling, this new position that he was going to be holding after 9/11, I walked out of there going, that's our job. He just laid out what our task is. And so I've placed it in the language of Christianese so that we can grasp this and work with it. And let me tell you, when he was done, I was like, my jaw was kind of on the ground. I realized this is really important. Like, really important. So first of all, as an ambassador, you are the official and legal representative of your king. There's no higher calling than that. You are the official and legal representative of your king, Jesus Christ. And you are that representative to a foreign land. It just so happens wherever you stand, wherever you walk, you are in that foreign land. Because our first citizenship is a heavenly citizenship, a kingdom citizenship. An ambassador needs to know his king's power and position, his king's interests, and you represent his interests, not your own. You subvert your interests to his. You make sure that your interests align with his interests. An ambassador, and this came through very clearly, an ambassador has to understand the culture that he is to be an ambassador in. And this is something the U.S. ambassador made very clear. He says, I've got to learn Arabic history. I've got to spend time understanding its economic culture, its social culture. I have to understand how Saudi Arabia works. Why? So that he can effectively inform them of his government's position. And what was interesting in all this is he's set apart from that culture. He is distinct. He is different than that culture. And yet he still is inside of it. He can't be uninformed as to what its composition is. You are in the world, but you're not of the world. That's the bottom line. And in all of this, you do it so that you can effectively communicate your king's message. And then the second part of being an ambassador is when you see challenges to the king's interest, you inform the rest of the diplomatic community. Hey, wake up. This is what's coming down the pike. Here's where the challenges lie. You are the legal and official representative. How now will you respond? Not react. We're really good at reacting. We suck at responding. How do we respond? There is a difference. And so this is what our role is. Again, it's not what you're becoming, it is what you are. Are you effective? A fantastic example, and I believe this is the model that we will have to end up really thinking through in terms of how we are ambassadors in this culture, is found in Acts 17. I'll read it for us, and then we'll break it down a little bit. Now, while Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. Therefore, he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers, and in the marketplace daily with those who happened to be there. Then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection." And he took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak? For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore we want to know what these things mean." For all the Athenians and foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord, in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has also given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." By the way, that's the same response you're going to be getting as an ambassador. Some will mock you. Some may say, "I want to hear more." Some may even come to Christ. But your goal is to be that ambassador. So let's break this down briefly. Verses 16, he recognizes the spiritual situation. He is there. He has surveyed their city. He understands the culture. He engages with the Jewish and the Gentile believers. He goes to where there is a synagogue, and he is spending time interacting with them. Then he encounters the philosophers of the day, and he is taken to the council. Now, there's a backstory to this. He is taken to the council of the Areopagus. These are the judges of the city. There is a deep, deep esoteric pagan background to this council. They arose out of the past, out of a pagan past. And they are there to judge the city. They're there specifically to judge the beliefs that come in and out of the city, to talk about those things, to discuss those things, discuss issues of belief. Paul is now standing before a court. He's being judged. He's being judged on what he is saying. Now, this isn't just any court. There's a backdrop to this court. This is on the shoulder of the hill of the Acropolis. And on the top of the Acropolis is the temple of Zeus, massive, massive edifice, standing behind Paul. And the temple of Nike, and the temple of Athena. He is literally standing before a court of pagan judges with this backdrop of the most raw and intense pagan world that you can imagine. and he has to give an account. A little bit intimidating. No? Yes, of course it is. I think we'd all be intimidated. I think in Paul's heart, he probably was as well. Paul's human. But he went. He entered in that court. And so he's there. He's now acknowledging their setting. He's taken the time to see their monuments and even found a monument to the unknown God. And he uses this now as leverage to launch into the gospel. And specifically, launching it into the character of God. He's the Lord of heaven and earth. He's not the same as Zeus. He's not the same as Athena. He is not the same as your deities attached to natural processes. He's distinct. He's outside of time, space, and matter. He is the creator. And so he goes into this breakdown of what this looks like. And of course, I think we're just getting the Cole's notes. I can just imagine what the conversation, how it must have all unfolded. It would have been remarkable. And he even understands their worldview enough to quote their own philosophers. He's quoting from the Hymn of Zeus. Very well-known passage. He knows his stuff. Not only does he know God's word, he understands the world he's in. And so they mock him. Some wanted to hear him and learn more. Some came to him. Exact same response that you will get. But that's our job. So what is the culture that we're in now? How do we find our foundation in terms of where the culture's at? If you're in my class at Miller College, you'd have to know this chart. And this actually would be on your test. So at the end of the afternoon, you're all going to get a test. You can break down the history, just very roughly, the epochs of Western thought, intellectual development, like this. Primitive paganism, roughly up to 500 AD. That was the Greco-Roman worldview. The early churches are rising out of that. They're working their way through this. They're presenting the gospel in a Greco-Roman pagan world where you see God-men as rulers, nature is personified. Then the realm of Christendom from roughly 500 to 1700 AD. And here we have the church influencing both the state and the culture, Christian institutions and ethics. Even though you may not be a believer, there is a sense of this morality that comes with it. God's word is applied to life. Most of this is coming through, of course, the Catholic Church and other institutions. We see the Reformation coming in at the end of this. But nevertheless, there is this amalgamation between culture, state, and religion. And then modernity from roughly 1700 to the 1960s. And I have the 1960s because there's a very specific reason for that. I look at the Vietnam era, first with what happened with France and then the United States. And you can see how those two blew themselves to pieces in Southeast Asia, and then the cultural repercussions that come with it. And it ends up destroying this sense of modernity. So we have modernity from 1700 to the 1960s, where it's the omnipotence of reason, materialism, science, secularism, a church-state separation. But again, like I said, in the 1960s, we see this breaking down. And in fact, it was breaking down before that. World War I gave us the industrial slaughterhouse, where we put the might of industry on the battlefield and killed 7,000 men per day for 4 years. And then World War II, modernity was closed off with atomic bombs. And then in the 60s, we see the breakdown in terms of Western civilization as a result of what happens in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And so the 1960s, postmodernism comes in. We don't trust modernity. We don't trust the secular institutions anymore. We don't trust Christianity. We've rejected both. What's left? What do we have left? Postmodernity gave us questions, or a space to have questions, but no answers. No true, tangible answers. And so there's no absolutes. It became a vacuum of meaning. At the same time, its own answers came through. And I've entitled that, and it's not my language, it's the language of others, and that is the realm of re-enchantment. Re-enchantment is this search for something that is spiritual, even as we mix in the secular. It combines, it all kind of coalesces, because what else do we have? We've rejected materialism in this hardcore sense, but we've rejected Christianity. All we have left now is nature. H.R. Rookmaaker, he was a contemporary and a friend of Francis Schaeffer, puts it this way in his book, Modern Art and the Death of Culture. Man wants to become human, caught in technocracy and computerized bureaucracy. He tries to wrestle free, but to get this freedom, he must jump out of the box, find a freedom outside technocracy, outside the world of naturalistic law and determinism. For modern man understands reality only in terms of scientism. So he has, it would seem, to get out of reality. He becomes a mystic. There is no age as mystical as ours. And he was right. So in the 1960s, and this is just a snapshot. If you're in my class, we'd be spending almost 2.5 hours wrestling through some of the ramifications of just this. So in the 1960s, we see this clash of cultures, the end of authority, looking for a new sense of direction. And so we opened up our minds and our spirits via psychedelics. Thank you to Mr. Huxley and Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, and all that took place. Eastern spirituality was absorbed by the culture. Moms and young people and professionals discovered yoga and transcendental meditation. Woodstock, of course, was an Aquarian exposition. It was love. It was exciting. And then a few months later, there was the Altamont Festival, and it all exactly turned into the opposite. Whereas Woodstock was free love, Altamont became the end of the hippie era with its destruction. And there's so many things that were taking place: world peace, anti-war movement, communal living, and there was a burgeoning digital technology, a burgeoning digital industry that was coalescing with cross-cultural links. Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth Catalog, which became kind of the first analog of the World Wide Web. By the time the 1980s and the 1990s come around, we have the human potential movement interacting with new senses of spirituality, express yourself, accept yourself, esteem yourself, and all this kind of moves together and gives us the New Age movement. And the New Age movement is really nothing more than a very thinly spread but very big smorgasbord of spiritual alternatives. And you can pick and choose. And it has a sense of self, a self-potential, a self-actualizing sensibility to it. At the same time, in the 1980s, pagan festivals are being birthed. Starwood, which is a huge one, pagan spirit gathering in the U.S. Midwest. The 1993 Parliament of the World Religions gives Wicca and witchcraft an official platform, and it becomes validated as a new religious movement. Green politics comes into play in a significant way, especially after 1992. And then new cultural expressions are birthed. Digital technology is married to ecstatic social experiences. And this comes alive, first of all, in Goa, because that's where the real hippies went after Altamont in the end of the 1960s. The hippies from San Francisco and the hippies from the UK traveled overland, went to Goa, India, and mixed together psychedelics and Hindu philosophy, and then digital technologies gave us new music, and then it moved from there to Israel, because if you were an Israeli soldier, where would you go for your time off? You went to Goa, and you absorbed that worldview, and you dropped it back into Israel, and eventually it makes its way back right around to the United States, where it all began. And we see techno and raves, first of all, landing in the shadows and then coming out into the culture. And this gives us what's called transformational culture, evolutionary culture. And it's a sense of now we feel the oneness, we feel our re-enchantment. We experience the world the way we wish it to be. And so this is really the bottom line is it becomes a communal experience in the form of festivals and gatherings. Now, this is old. This is an old map I did. It took me, I did this from 2013 to 2016. I mapped out where these events, because these are events where they take place. Do you see Alberta? In many ways, there's so much of this in your province. There's a lot in your province. Your province is big in this movement. So from 2013 to 2016, I had 265 pins on the board using Google Maps, which is very ironic because Google Maps was birthed out of this movement. You are all digital members of this transformational culture. You have no idea how tightly tied in your world is to what I will be sharing with you. I had another 50 or so events to go through, probably another 50 or so to add, but at the end of, 2016, I was done. The data was there. It was like, hello, wake up, it's in your backyard. I was at the Eclipse Festival, a transformational event that took place the beginning of April. And there it was acknowledged that there's roughly 800 events now in the US. Roughly 32 million Americans participate annually in what would be considered a transformational experience. So what does this mean? What does this look like? First of all, it's this sense of what's called communitas. It's just a fancy word to say we're feeling this oneness together in community. There's a power of experience together, and now we feel the sense of connection. When you go to these events, there's sacred spaces, there's temples, there's shrines, it's a spiritual experience. You can go to and do yoga and Reiki energy healing. You can engage in plant medicines, shamanism, psychedelics, lots of workshops, discussions, sharing circles, music, usually EDM, but there's everything, literally everything, including bluegrass. And the music is kind of the hook, but the real meat happens beyond the music, beyond the sound stages. Visionary interactive art. Art becomes something that's expressing a worldview. Art is really important because there's something very human about art. Art sets us apart from the animal world. There's a lot of things, by the way, that set us apart from the animal world. We're created in God's image, and there's a ton of meaning behind that. It's not just about your value, it's about who made you. And so our God is creative and has given us a sense of creativity as well. And so art is a deeply human experience. And so art here, in this visionary culture, relays worldviews. It relays a sense of understanding. There's a sense of harmony with nature. We're doing this usually in natural settings. Radical tolerance, non-judgmental, often clothing optional. And all of this, some of your head snapped up with that one. It's a journey, it's a quest, it's a place of transformation. You shed your limitations, and by transgressing the norms for a short time, you transform. And of course, that is the promise of Genesis chapter 3. Transgress God's norms, you transform. In this context, transgress social norms, the backward ways of your grandfathers and your great-grandparents and their Christian worldview, and you will transform. And it's to live utopia the way we want reality to be. G.K. Long, a Canadian event organizer and spokesperson, put it this way in 2010. No less profound is this emergence of a new type of spiritual culture in these festivals, a spiritual culture completely uninterested in charismatic leaders, dogmas, or doctrine, where ritual does not require that we surrender our autonomy as critical thinking individuals, but instead arises as the shared acknowledgement and honoring of our sacred experience together. And this is from an event organizer, and this is the pictures from the Ozora Festival in, I believe, in Hungary. We've now gone into what I think is a process, what some people call re-enchantment, their own sense of the sacred and of myth and legend. And yes, myth and legend is very much a part of this experience. And so, for a few minutes, let me take you to one in Alberta. Freezer burn. Not far from Ponoka, which is, of course, known for cowboys and stampedes and oil derricks. If you go off into the bush, you can go to freezer burn. And we've got a couple of people here who have done it with me. I'm very thankful for their friendship. Brian and Audrey have been a big part of this work. And we've been to freezer burn now a couple times doing social surveys, because how else are you going to understand a culture unless you take the time to actually dive into it? And again, as I said earlier, I do take my research very seriously. And this is research. You go in with surveys. You try to understand where they're coming from. So over and over again in the religious categorization, because I have a listing of religions past and present. Past is Christian, past is Christian, past is Christian, past is Christian. Done with Christianity. What am I now? Atheist, agnostic, Wiccan, transhuman, pagan. The list goes on. You'll hear or you'll see people as they're writing down statements on my survey, because there's places to write them down. Things like, we are all one, we are all connected, we're all part of one universal consciousness. In 17, I asked the question on my surveys, why are you attending? This gets into the human element of it. It's because you realize they're searching for something. They're hoping and searching for something. Why are you attending? Friends and connection, to give and receive joy, fun and meet people, try and forget about the world, love myself, open my mind, make a sacrifice to the art gods. The one that kind of struck me was, and this is the lady who was camped beside us, to be with my daughter, ask what her religious identification was, broken-hearted. In 2023, Brian, Audrey, and myself were back again doing surveys. I asked in the survey, how is this transformational? It's a safe space for self-expression, to be me without fear. It's experiences beyond the normal routine, a space for genuine conversations. And yes, you can have conversations if you enter that space with a sense of respect, because they are people. They are all people made in God's image. And we tend to forget that sometimes, don't we? We view the people as the enemy when it's not the people, it is the worldview, as the powers and principalities, the power of erroneous ideas. It's a place where I can tackle my social anxiety. I'm seeing people with their guard down. This restores my trust in humanity. It feels like home, a more truly human experience. And repeatedly I've heard, this is our church. So it's a global movement. There's events that take place in Costa Rica, lots of them in Australia, New Zealand, even China hosts these kinds of events. And of course, Israel does as well. So October the 7th, Hamas comes over the border, kills, maims, destroys. They go to a music or a concert venue. You all saw it. I know you saw it. You saw all of a sudden there's a shoot up at this big music festival. I know some people were going, why is there a big Buddha statue in some of the pictures I'm seeing? It wasn't a music concert. The media doesn't know how to frame this. It was a transformational festival. I knew these people. I don't know them personally, but I know them. I know their worldview. I know where they're coming from. I know what they're looking for. These were people who I've interacted with for a long time. This wasn't a concert. This was a transformational festival. I'm like, wow, you went searching for meaning, for ecstasy, for community, and you die. Tragic. And it was part of actually a global movement, spinning first of all out of Brazil, that specific festival that took place, the Nova Festival. And then the Texas Eclipse Festival, the event that probably nobody here really even heard of. I thought maybe this would be the event that the Christian community would all of a sudden wake up regarding the eclipse, because there was 35,000 to 45,000 people who would gather in this container, literally to venerate the sun, with ceremonies and rituals, with workshops and all kinds of stuff. And I thought, the Christian community, wake up, hello, we are a paganized culture. Hello, wake up. But no, instead, our social media blew up with, portals will open, it's the end of the world, the trajectory is intersecting with another trajectory, there's going to be chaos. Oh, stop with the fear, people. Come on. We are superstitious and speculative creatures, aren't we? That's what we did with the eclipse. Meanwhile, in Texas, thousands of people are gathering to engage in what is essentially an issue of worldview. So I was there with a friend. I went to workshops on artificial intelligence, went to workshops on new space technologies. We had NASA insiders. We had Elon Musk's top people. We've had conversations on brain-computer interfacing, how far along that's come. There's stuff that I can't even talk to you about because it would take a weekend to just bring you up to speed with even the terminology and how this is all being framed. And at the same time, we had ceremonies and rituals and venerating of the sun and all that went into it. Discussions on psychedelics. So it was pretty wild because, as you see in the picture, on the one side we have indigenous shamans in ceremony, but just literally a couple of 100 yards away, we had a great big space stage where we had Elon Musk's people and some of the top thought leaders inside of the space industry working through deep, deep technology and bridging the two to the point where even they were talking about how we're really experiencing is, and this is a very important term, it's an ancient future worldview. Ancient in the sense that we pull from our pagan past, we reinvigorate it, re-energize it, and we marry it with technology. We marry it with the future. And we have an ancient future worldview. So in terms of time, I'm just going to skip this video. No, I'm not. I'm just going to... Here's one of the... Oh, sorry. Here's one of the technologies that we saw. Drones. That woke you up, didn't it? 6-minute drone show. I just fast forwarded it. Sorry, it's a little bit jerky, a little bit jumpy. These are all drones. And all of a sudden the whole sky is lit up with these incredible drones. Hundreds of drones. We see our own pre-eclipse with drones. And this gives you a sense of what it's like to be there. Can you imagine putting that over the city of Calgary? You could just freak people right out. Again, drones. There you go. Anyways, high tech meets the ancient worldview. So let me quickly take you to the mothership. I'm meaning that actually. This is the mothership. This is Burning Man, which takes place in the northern Nevada desert, the Black Rock Desert, and many of you probably heard about it last year because we got rained out and CNN was flying over us and MSNBC and the world was coming to an end because a bunch of us people got wet and muddy. Whip-de-doo, you know? We just got rain, so what? Anyways, this is the culture. This is the trendsetter when it comes to transformational and evolutionary culture. This is what the city looks like. It literally is a city. The center of the city is a man, a huge human effigy. That's what you're seeing in the very center. Off to the far end is a temple. Roughly 80,000 people attend this event every year. It started off in 1986 with the summer solstice in San Francisco. 1990, about 500 people were attending. The police in San Francisco come along and say, hey, you can't do this. You can't burn this effigy on the beach, Baker Beach, because you don't have a permit. Of course, that's what it's all about, right? So off they go and to northern Nevada, to Black Rock Desert, and they engage in this activity there. By 1997, there's 10,000 people coming to it. They put a temple in place in the year 2000, and the temple now is really more the focus point even than the man. Attendance in 2010 exceeded 50,000. 2019, it was 78,000. And then 2020 and 2021, during COVID, they had virtual burns. Very, very well done. And of course, it should be. This is Silicon Valley's event. This is Google's event. This is Apple. This is Microsoft. They're all there. This really is their event. This is their worldview, or pardon me, their world. And then last year we had rain and mud. Wow, we had mud. There's roughly 100 plus regional burns across the world, including right here in Alberta with freezer burn. Midburn in Israel, where they burn an effigy of Adam and Eve. That's an annual event. This is the cutting edge of culture. The reason that I have Google up there is because that is the very first Google Doodle. So you all go on Google, you use it, you all use Burning Man's tech. So in 1998, when Google incorporated itself as a company and became the company it is today, Larry Page and the rest of the crew said to their attorneys, you're going to work out the paperwork. I can't remember, I've heard the figure, I can't remember how many millions were lost by saying, we're going to Burning Man, you guys work through the legal side of it, but this is more important to us. And so they hung up their shingle on their webpage, the very first Google Doodle, the Burning Man symbol, and took off back to the Black Rock Desert. Later on, they would look for a new CEO, Eric Schmidt. And Eric Schmidt made Google what it is today. And you all use his stuff. And the reason he got the position of CEO is because he had Burning Man on his resume. That's how important this is. Elon Musk's first Tesla Roadster wasn't introduced in Milan or Toronto or Chicago. It was first publicly unveiled at Burning Man, because all of this comes together in this one location. Larry Harvey put it this way regarding the 2017 theme. The moral of our theme, in fact, was that it doesn't really matter what you believe, it's what you experience. The whole point this year was to convince people that Burning Man is a spiritual movement. It's not a religion, but it's a spiritual movement, and you know it when you see it. I'll play you just a very brief clip. This will give you a sense of at least what it looks like, because I can't explain it any other way. So it looks like chaos. This is why Eric Schmidt got the job. Google's basically said, look, if you can see the networks in what looks like chaos, in what looks like disjointed information or energy, you'll understand the ethos of Google. So if you can see this in that light, then you get Google. All this is temporarily built. All done in the space of a couple of weeks, and then celebrated for roughly 9 days, 10 days, and then disassembled, and done again the next year. So there I am in 2017, Radical Ritual. The man was put in his own temple that year. 2018 was iRobot. That was the theme, asking the big question, can man and machine merge? What's it going to look like? What's our new transhuman future going to look like? 2019 was Metamorphosis. That was the theme. How are we going to evolve? How are we going to change? Once we're no longer human, what will this look like? How will man evolve? Last year was Animalia, and the man was placed on a pedestal surrounded by honeycombs. You were part of the hive. And then the man is burnt. And I'll just jump ahead real quick, give you a sense of what that looks like. And when the man burns at the end of the week, it's exciting, it's ecstatic, it's fireworks, it's loud, it's a cacophony of sounds. And yeah, I sped it up. But here's where the heart and the soul comes together, at the temple. Very different than when the man is put up. So the temple starts off as a blank slate. The walls are empty. And here's where the humanity really, like I said, comes forward. This is the temple in 2018, 65 feet tall, 250 feet wide, a great big spiral. Temple of Galaxia, the universal Gaia. 2019's temple, these are big, big structures. And then last year's Temple of the Heart, huge, huge structure. We don't have time to really get into it, but so what happens at the temple? As I said, it starts off with a blank slate. All the walls are empty. And then as the week progresses, people write on the walls their pain, their anger, their hurt, their hate, their desires. In my hand, I'm holding a suicide note. It goes into quite some detail. The essence being, if I'm successful in my suicide, bring the note to the temple so it can burn. So the walls get filled with this kind of language, with these messages. It became real when they took you away in a body bag out of the house. Mother, you disappoint me every day. You thought you could handle the power when you plucked the fruit, then it became a mystery and you again a stranger. And then all week long it just mounds up. Wedding dresses hanging up, urns of loved ones, the ashes of loved ones brought in. People are depositing their photo albums, their personal journals. It is weeping and mourning and crying for the entire week. It is a funeral, a 24-hour long, 8-9 day funeral. And it's hard. So as you see images of Burning Man and this type of culture, recognize that this is really the heart of it. This is where it really breaks down. With this temple I burn my previous judgment, fundamentalism, bigotry, and religious imprisonment. Let's be free, kind, and full of joy. And then the temple burns. And when the temple burns, there's no fireworks, no shouting, no loud music. It's quiet. All you hear is the sound of the fire and people crying. Last year we had a very interesting art piece called the Chapel of Babel, a 60-foot tall Tower of Babel. And this is the inside of it as well. They had a triumphal arch. They had a chamber set up so you could go in as a confessional and confess your sins. And then that all burned at the end. So, while this was burning, our little team, we've got a little group. In fact, last year it was little, just 3 of us. We're looking at maybe this year we might have 11 people coming. We have 4 tickets already secured. We got to somehow get the rest of the tickets to get the rest of the team there. But while Chapel of Babel was burning, Brian was getting pestered by this lady. And Brian's got this interesting personality. Doesn't matter where we go, Brian ends up having people coming to him. Audrey and I are like, well, we'll just keep walking because Brian's going to talk for the next 2 hours. That's just how it works, right, Brian? Pretty much, yes. And so Brian also does some blacksmithing as a hobby. I'm just giving you one little illustration. There's many, many, many of these kinds of little illustrations. And this chick is bugging Brian. And it's midnight. We're watching this thing burn at midnight. And she wants to have a conversation. And Brian's tired and wants basically nothing to do with her. And then finally Brian said, yeah. So they have this little conversation and she talks about a journey. And I'm just giving you the Coles notes. And when it's all done, Brian takes out one of his crosses. He does blacksmithing and he makes these crosses and hands her a cross and says, trust Jesus. And she just breaks right there. And the tears just stream. And she's staring in Brian's eyes and staring and staring and staring. And the tears are coming down and it's getting awkward because it's locked on. And then she turns to Audrey and does the same thing to Audrey. And then she turns to me and does the same thing to me. And she's grabbed my arm and I hold her shoulder and the tears are just streaming. And then she gets up and leaves. And we have no idea. The 3 of us are like, what just happened? Like, what just happened? We have no idea what her background is. We have no clue how many little seeds have been dropped into her life along the way. But here was another little seed that could be dropped in. And so when we're there, we're looking to have those kinds of conversations. And sometimes it's really small like that, but really impactful. Sometimes the conversations are really big and might go on for a long time. And sometimes they just, kind of fizzle out. But you're there to be an ambassador, right? So we go to workshops as well, because this is where the world is coming together. If you want to know where cryptocurrency is going, where new digital futures are happening, this is where you go. It's a Silicon Valley's event. The one workshop on the far end was on Jesus and psychedelics, with a Christian camp. I use that in quotations because that's actually a big thing. That's coming together. There's a trend you need to be aware of. The week before I was at the Parliament of World Religions at a workshop. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that tomorrow on integrating psychedelics into seminaries and chaplaincy services, doing it at an institutional level. Here we're hearing it from pastors at an individual level, justifying using psychedelics because it allows us now to feel love, feel oneness. And yes, it was muddy, really muddy. The bottom pictures of toilets, porta potties. No, it didn't overflow like that. That's mud tramped in. And it was mud, mud, mud. So over the years, we've got our little ragtag group. We started this little experiment in 2017. Can we bring the gospel of Jesus Christ into the middle of re-enchantment, right to the heart of the new pagan future? Can we do it? Yes, you can. 100%. You have to see them as people first. My friend Bob, the fellow who's in the picture in the center, he puts it this way. He says, "You're my brother or sister in Adam. I want you to be my brother or sister in Christ." And Bob has been going back. He's been there since 1997, interacting with the Burn community. He's a retired guy. And Bob actually self-jokes about, "Hey, I'm just a white tubby guy hanging out with all you bunch of crazy people." But he loves them. And he shares the gospel. And we all have had conversations. Like I said, big ones and small ones. Sometimes it's frustrating because nothing really seems to happen. And I have to remind our little crew sometimes, look, we're only here for a handful of days, year in, year out. The conversations will come. But wherever your feet are, that's where your ministry is, right? Whether it's here in Calgary, or right here in this room, or intentionally at a place like Burning Man. You can bring the gospel to the Burning Man. You can bring the gospel to a re-enchanted pagan culture. The gentleman on the far end on the bottom, the guy that, not the guy wearing the no shirt or the shirtless guy, but the guy with a shirt, his name was Adam. This is 2018. Adam moved in with us. We had a crew of 6 people, and all of a sudden we had a tribe of 15 people around us that year. It's pretty weird how it all kind of happened. And because we had conversations all week long about Christianity and religion and all kinds of stuff. And finally, one evening, Adam came up to me and he's like, "Hey, the rest of you guys, they all go to bed by midnight or 1, and you just disappear." And I do. I'm on my bicycle and away I go, because the night's young. Let's go until you drop, right? You can live on caffeine for a week. And Adam's like, "Where do you go? Can I hang out with you?" I said, "Yeah, come with me." And halfway through, sometime maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, he's like, I stopped him and I go, "Dude, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" He's not a Christian. "What's wrong with you? You're hanging out with a bunch of Christians. You're at Burning Man. You have every sensual pleasure at your fingertips. And you're hanging out with a bunch of Christians? Like, seriously, what's wrong with you?" He's like, "I'm learning so much from you guys." That's what it's about. That's it. Listen, you don't have to go to Burning Man. You have Burning Calgary. You have Burning Stettler. You have Burning Lloydminster. Just walk out the doors. It's right here, literally right here. I was outside, I think about 3:30, 4 o'clock. I had to take a phone call, stepped outside, and there was a pride button on the ground. It's right here. Here's the question. Not are you an ambassador, are you taking that calling seriously? That is a challenge I'm leaving for you this afternoon. God bless. We'll see you later.